Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into another episode of the Straight Fire Podcast. It is a joy to have you, and we want to encourage you to take this time to support the podcast in whatever way that you find best, whether it be leaving a 5-star review, leaving a like, comment on the YouTube video. If you have any questions, we would love for you to go ahead and email us those at thestraightfirepodcast@gmail.com, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think that's what I've always said. So
Yes,
yeah,
there it is.
Email us there. We love seeing your questions and responding to them. We've written out a few responses that we've sent out to people. So it's just it's so good to hear from y'all, and it's so good to build this community together where we're all seeking to find the answers. So for the topic that we have today, jumping straight into it, unless y'all have anything y'all want to add.
Nope.
No shout outs. No.
Not this time, no.
I mean, I would like to shout out GBN for letting us record in their studio.
Yeah.
I don't know if y'all noticed, but this isn't the
A little bit of an upgrade.
Yeah, this isn't like the white table and the cloth behind us that it usually is. Yeah, a little bit of an upgrade, but thank you to GBN for letting us come here and record in their studio. Again, so y'all, anything y'all want to say?
I think you covered it all.
All right, sounds good. Today's topic is going to be from 1 Chronicles 21.
Yes, 21.
Okay, good. I had that written down in my notes. I wanted to make sure. 1 Chronicles 21, talking about David numbering the people. And this has been a personal favorite story of mine, which is, I guess, a little fitting because not a little fitting, but it's an interesting one. It's not a more popular one like David and Goliath and, the Elijah and the prophets of Baal, right? It's a little less well known, which is surprising to me because of the fact of the scale of this story, right? And how interesting and intriguing it is. And I've actually preached a sermon on this story before, and it's just, I don't know, I just love this story. But I guess we do need to go ahead and jump straight into it. No, would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, is there any precursor you have for this story? Noah or Landon, do y'all have?
I think it's a very interesting story, and I don't want to spoil anything.
Yeah.
I'd rather get right into it.
Yeah.
I think we can learn a lot from it. And people don't often go to it to learn lessons. We don't often go to the Old Testament to learn lessons, I think, because they're a little bit harder to learn. It takes a little bit more effort to find the value in them, right? But they have some very good values. They show some very good characteristics of God. And if we're trying to be more like God, then we need to know more about him. And this helps us do that.
One of the things that's important about this story is the context right before it. And basically, without reading all of chapter 20 and 19, David has been winning these huge battles, right? He has had victory after victory after victory against, Israelites' enemies, the Philistines, and the like. And, so David right now is at a very good point in his life. And then we read verse 1. 1 Chronicles 21, starting in verse 1, and it says, "Now Satan stood up against Israel and moved David to number Israel." So as you know, we often have questions. Typically, we have a topic divided into 3 questions. For this one, I have a question right out of the gate. Talking about verse 1, does Satan still stand up? What does that even mean? Satan stood up against David, right? I kind of see in my mind like this movie scene where like David just won this battle and then the camera like pans down to Satan and it's just him, like it's a shot behind his throne or whatever Satan sits on, or I guess he was sitting because he stood, and Satan kind of stands,
Benjamin. Whatever goes through your mind.
Y'all don't see the same thing?
Not quite. But
okay, but like, what does that mean? Satan stood up.
Landon's got it.
Oh, I got
Yeah,
you.
you got it.
This is an interesting idea when you think about Satan standing up. And I feel like more than anything, what this was trying to show was Satan's thoughts on this. You think of all the times in scripture where it specifically states that Satan was rising up against this. You think when he did specific things, with Peter, Jesus said, he has requested you that he may shift you like wheat. And you think of all the times that Satan would stand up, if you will, against people. And so I think more than anything, I don't know if he literally stood up from his seat or as much as it was, this was something that Satan saw he had a chance because this was a man after God's own heart. And Satan saw that this was his chance to get him. And so he stood up against David. And so I think really what this verse is showing is that even someone as righteous, David messed up, but he was a very righteous man. He had done all these great things. Satan still saw the opportunities with David, and he stood up against that because he saw that there was an opportune time.
I think one of the lessons we can learn from this, and I I mean, I think we still know Satan moves today in the world. We're not sure how. Obviously,
there is a Straight Forward podcast. Podcast on that. So
the Bible gives us very specific insights on how Satan moves and stuff like that. And obviously, I'm sure it's a little different today. We can't be 100% sure. But one of the lessons we can learn from that is every time Satan moved against somebody, he was very good at what he does, right? We think about David, like Landon said, a man after God's own heart. We think about Judas, one of the chosen apostles, that it says Satan entered Judas's heart. You know, every time Satan moves, the temptation is going to be really difficult, right?
Oh yeah, I was just saying it's kind of scary in a way of like, you know, we often talk about when we are in low moments, right? When we're going through hard times, we are vulnerable to Satan's temptations and things like that. But also in the good moments, right? When we are winning battles, so to speak, at the same time, we're still vulnerable. We just don't, it's harder for us to see. And so it is kind of distressing, if you will, to face that reality of no matter kind of where I am in my life, I'm always vulnerable to Satan's temptations. How do y'all deal with that reality?
One of the things I think that I try to do, at least, well, obviously I try to pray all the time, right? To keep me from temptation. But, and it kind of goes hand in hand, right? Sometimes when I'm at life's highs, I do fall into temptation and I mess up, right? But that always brings me back to God. And sometimes when I'm in life's lows, well, I still mess up, but that also brings me back to God. You're not going to be perfect, whether you're in a good time of life or in a bad time of life. As long as when you mess up, if you come back to God every time, allow that temptation, like David did, as we'll see later, to bring you closer to God, not drive you farther away from him. Because it starts to drive us farther away from him when we're in those low moments and we try to fix it on our own and we get lower. Or we're in those high moments and we sin and mess up and we want to stay in that high moment and we don't want to give into that humility of submitting to God and we try to make things better on our own. If we come back to God every time we mess up, right? And each person struggles with different things, so they're going to deal with those temptations differently. But if we come back to God every single time we mess up, no matter where we are, then it's going to work out the best it can.
Landon, is that the strategy that you employ, or?
I mean, I agree. I'm just going to add on to it. I think even in David's life, he showed what you have to do to stay faithful, even though he didn't always do it. He showed the pattern. And you see David, after he had sinned with Bathsheba and he had done the things that he did, and then he has a son, but he loses his son. And so he's in this very low spot. And his response is, I trust God. And this is going to be something that plays a key role in this account as we read through it, is his trust in God. And we realize, when we talk about the hard times and the storms in our life, we talk about trusting God. You got to trust God when you don't understand what's going on. You don't have to, because he does. And so we have to learn to trust God when times get hard. Equally important is trusting God when times get good. And I think this is what David wasn't ready for. David had a really strong faith in God when times got hard. But what he wasn't ready for was to have a strong faith in God when the times were really good.
Yeah, I'm preaching on trust this coming Sunday at a congregation. And one of the examples I use is David. Because think about, we look at all the hard times he went through. And I was looking through the Psalms where he cried out to God. And every time David was in a rough spot, he always went to God. Most of the examples when David messed up were in those good times, right? Were in the times he wasn't really ready for it. Every time he's being hunted by Saul, he doesn't know whether he's going to be king or not. When Saul and Jonathan die in a pretty gruesome way, all of those times he cries out to God, right? And he always says God is the one who sustains him in those hard times. It is the good times where David struggles, we see. And, that's natural, especially for the king, right? That makes sense. And that's natural for us too. When things are hard, we go to God. But when things get good, we rely on for some reason, we think we're the person who got us out of the hard times. We start relying on ourselves, as silly as that seems.
Right. Yeah, the Psalms is where my mind went as well. Just like, again, when David was being hunted, he wrote those beautiful Psalms about the Lord being his rock and his protection and all that stuff. But in the good times, when David's on the rooftop looking at all of his kingdom, that's when he found Bathsheba, right? When David has just won these many battles with his massive army, which we're going to read about in a little bit, that's when he numbered the people. Just that idea of Satan understands when you are vulnerable, and he knew that David was most vulnerable, not in the bad times, but in the good times.
Apparently, David just stopped going to the rooftop.
David should just listen. David should stay with his army. Okay, David,
stay away from the rooftop.
Stay with your army. Just don't go anywhere else. But yeah, continuing on in 1 Chronicles 21, looking at verse 2. Let's see. The scripture says, "So David said to Joab and to the leaders of the people, 'Go, number Israel from Beersheba to Dan, and bring the number of them to me, that I may know it.' And Joab answered." Oh no! I'm sorry. No, we're gonna.
I still had a thought on verse 1 because there's something very interesting, and I'm gonna have Landon help me. We talked about this a little beforehand. So if you read the 2 Samuel account of this in 2 Samuel 24,
right. I remember you. Yeah.
In 2 Samuel 20, and I know we spent a lot of time on verse 1, but verse 1 is fascinating.
It is.
So in 2 Samuel 24:1, it said the Lord moved David. Right. Mm-hmm. In 1 Chronicles 21:1, it says Satan provoked David. The same Hebrew word is used in both. It means to prick or to stimulate something or someone into action, to entice or persuade or provoke. Now, it sounds like off the rip that God moved David to sin, right? Because it says God was looking for an opportunity against his people because his people had sinned and he was going to use David to bring punishment on his people. So it looks like, well, David had no choice and God just made him do that. We know that can't be true because James 1:13-14 says, every man is tempted when he himself is drawn away. So that's not an option, right? We have to believe, we're going to talk about this later, I know. We have to believe that all scripture agrees with one another and it can't contradict. And this is one of those things, right, where God does not tempt anyone. It's really just the fact that God knew what David was going to do and he was going to use that. Even though it was a sin, God can use everything to his good. He was going to use that sin to bring his people back to him. Like we talked about, when Israel was having a really good time right now, they were going to get punished and they were going to come back to God. And ultimately, that was for their good, right? But God knew what was going to happen. It's kind of like, I'm going to use you for an example, Benjamin. I'm sorry. No. Mom knows Benjamin hates to clean his room and will never clean his room.
I don't like how you just put me because I feel like you're kind of in that same boat as well.
So if mom asked Benjamin to clean the room, she knows what he's going to say and what he's going to do, but she's still going to at least provide him with the opportunity to not do that, right? So it's not that mom made Benjamin sin by asking Benjamin to clean the room. It's just that because of the option she presented with Benjamin, we know how Benjamin's going to respond. And it's kind of the same way with David, right? God knew David was going to fall into this sin. Not that he didn't want David to fall into this sin. It's sad that David did fall into this sin, but God was going to use it to his advantage, right? And this is talked about in Romans, talking about Pharaoh, God hardening Pharaoh's heart. He didn't actually harden Pharaoh's heart. It's just the situation God presented Pharaoh with. God knew how Pharaoh would respond.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I agree with all of that. I'm glad you brought that up.
I just wanted to clear it up because it's the same. It's said differently in each passage, and it's good to clarify that.
Len, do you have anything before we want to move on to verse 2?
Oh, no. All I was going to say is, we see it with Pharaoh. God hardened Pharaoh's heart. He didn't literally harden Pharaoh's heart. He gave Pharaoh free will, and he knew how Pharaoh would respond, and he was going to use that. And it's the same way with David.
Okay, does anybody have anything else before we move on?
Sorry, I just wanted to cover that before we left.
I know, you're good. So David said to Joab and to the leaders of the people, "Go, number Israel from Beersheba to Dan, and bring the number of them to me, that I may know it." And Joab answered, "May the Lord make his people 100 times more than they are. But my lord the king, are they not all my lord's servants? Why then does the Lord require this thing? Why should he be a cause of guilt in Israel?" Nevertheless, the king's word prevailed against Joab. Therefore Joab departed and went throughout all Israel and came to Jerusalem. And then Joab gave the sum of the number of the people to David. All Israel had 1,100,000 men who drew the sword, and Judah had 470,000 men who drew the sword. But he did not count Levi and Benjamin among them, for the king's word was abominable to Joab. I remember I was preparing my notes for this and the questions I was going to send y'all. And I was walking, and I was walking and I was listening to it, and I was taking notes down on my phone, and I did a double take when I heard those numbers. And I preached on this before, and I was like, 1 million and what? Cause that is such a huge number. 1,100,000 men who drew the sword. I don't know if Is our
was
military that big?
All together is 1,500,000.
I was about to say, and is Judah counted separately?
Yeah, Judah. I mean, yeah, Judah is kind of. I mean, in most accounts, it says 1 million men for Israel and 1,100,000 men for Israel, 400,000 for Judah. And like, I think if you look at depictions of the kingdom back then, it was massive.
Yeah,
which
I'm
makes
sure.
sense to have that many people. But yeah,
That is because I feel like I've heard an argument saying like, well, you know, in the Bible, like David really wasn't a king of that big of a nation. Like, we're not even sure if Israel was a real nation. We thought it was just kind of like sheep herder, you know, a nation of like nomads or whatever. But
Apparently not.
1,500,000 men is an incredibly large number. Like, no one's out. I'm never going to see that many people at one place in my lifetime, let alone all men who could fight. Those are, again, insane numbers, but while that is an eye-catching number, what's important here is, I guess, Landon, let me direct this question to you, because I know that the old law says God commands his people that numbering the people is a sin, right? Outside of, because weren't there commanded censuses?
was there a commanded census?
Yeah, that's it.
There you go.
I think there was, yeah, but
Okay.
only God had the right to number the people.
So, but why did God say that numbering the people is a sin?
So I actually looked this up a little bit more. I felt like I knew the answer, but I wanted to make sure. So I looked at several commentaries, and I actually got different answers. And I thought that was a little weird because I thought it was just like obvious answer. But there was the main reason that I saw, like collectively, that most scholars agreed with, and I'm not a scholar, but including myself. I was about to say including myself, but that's grouping me with scholars. But is that what he was doing is he was numbering the people. And God knew, that's why he said it was not okay to do that. He knew that anyone that was numbering the people, not because he was curious about how many people there were, not because he wanted to see about taxes. It was because he wanted to know what his army looked like, because he had seen all of the wars like you had mentioned. He had won all of these wars, all of these battles. And his response to that, instead of being God was with us, is, man, I've got a good army. And since my army's so good, actually I need to see how many people I have, because if I know, then I can start thinking about what battles I can get into and which ones I need to stay away from. And so what we see him doing is he starts numbering the people, and what he's showing is he's putting his reliance and his ability to lead his army and the power of his own army instead of God.
Also, maybe David was thinking of like launching into a campaign, right? And he was, you know, because doesn't Jesus say, who goes to war without counting the cost, right? Maybe David was thinking about that cost, right? Because it's interesting. I've just thought about this. You know, in the Bible, we talk a lot about God commanded his people to take the land of Israel and defend the land of Israel from, you know, from those enemies around it. But he never, in my remembrance of the Bible, I don't think he ever commands them to go attack other nations surrounding them so they can take that land, right? Am I wrong in that?
I would think I don't remember any.
It was the
instance
conquest of Canaan. But
Yeah,
And
outside of that,
that's
yeah.
all they were commanded. To
I mean,
take.
Israel never launched in like campaigns that like, you know, Babylon and
Now,
Syria went on.
sometimes I remember, and I can't give you the exact geographic locations, but in 1 Samuel, God told Saul to go destroy Amalek, I think it was.
Yeah, but that was because of their wickedness, right?
Because they rejected the people in Israel. Because when they first got into Canaan, they attacked Israel.
Yeah.
But I think Amalek was in the borders of Canaan.
Yeah.
From my understanding.
But yeah, so maybe David's thinking about this campaign, you know, like I've got this many soldiers, so I can go here, here, and here because I know I've got stronger armies than them.
Yeah. You know, I was just gonna say it's really interesting that, like, I think I've heard this argument before. Well, if numbering the people is a sin, then why did God do it? Like, God didn't already know the number of the people.
Yeah.
Like,
And it was also the reason why, you know.
Yeah,
God,
exactly.
When God numbered the people, for whatever reason he didn't give why. But it wasn't because he was relying on this.
Yeah, it wasn't because he was like,
He
gonna boast
does
about those
rely on
numbers.
his
Yeah.
own power.
He
Like,
probably, the leaders probably, you have to know, I mean, you shouldn't number David went out specifically to number his army, right?
Yeah.
So he could know how many fighting men he had. But sometimes, like, if you're leading people, you need to know how many people you have.
Yeah, that's you know, even like the elders of a church know, you know,
Yeah.
we take attendance and congregation numbers and all that to make sure that we have, you know, the right amount, the right amount of people there.
And that's what this point is. The point isn't God is against counting people.
Yeah.
What God didn't want was David to number the people because he knew. The reason he didn't want him to do it is because he didn't want David to do the wrong thing. And
Right.
so he didn't want him to do it because he knew why he would. And so God said, don't do this like he does for us today. There's things he tells us to stay away from, not because he's just mean or he's wanting to be a dictator, but because he knows if I do this, that I'm logically going to do this, and that's going to get me in a spot I don't need to be. And so he knew it would be a stumbling block for David to count his men.
Right. For instance, like if we flip this around, like, I guess counting church attendance could be a sin. For instance, if the elders are like, well, look how many numbers we're pulling in, right? And when it becomes more about the numbers, then it becomes about the people, right?
Yeah.
And that's when that would be a sin. Again, there's a lot of things that can be fine in nature, but sinful in the way that it's gone about, or the reason that it's done for, I guess. And so that's why this was such a big deal for David. And so, unless y'all have anything to add before
Really
we move on.
quickly, sorry,
No, you're good.
it's bad when Joab disagrees with it, because Joab was a bad dude. Like Joab was not a good person at all. No,
it's been a while since I've read the Old Testament and talked about Joab.
Joab was just, at the end of David's life, David says to Solomon, I want you to kill Joab because of all the things he's done to me. In battle, like for instance, when Saul and David were against each other, Abner was the commander for Saul and Joab was the commander for David. And Abner comes and makes peace with David, and Joab calls him back without David knowing and kills him in the gate. Like went to hug him and then stabs him in the gut.
Joab was very much military.
Because Abner killed Joab's brother in combat.
Oh, okay.
Abner makes peace with David, and Joab went to hug him and stabs him. So again, and Joab did other things too, but not a good person.
Yeah, I remember here, reading about Joab and like the stuff that he did. It wasn't. I don't know. Again, I haven't read through the Old Testament in quite a while, but so you're right. If Joab
thought it was bad, then it was bad.
So picking up in verse 7 of 1 Chronicles 21, and God was displeased with the thing. Therefore, he struck Israel. So David said to God, I have sinned greatly because I have done this thing. But now I pray, take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have done very foolishly. Then the Lord spoke to Gad, David's seer, saying, go and tell David, saying, thus says the Lord, I offer you 3 things. Choose one of them for yourself, that I may do it to you. So Gad came to David and said to him, thus says the Lord, choose for yourself either 3 years of famine or 3 months to be defeated by your foes with the sword of your enemies overtaking you, or else 3 days of the sword of the Lord and the plague in the land with the angel of the Lord destroying throughout all the territory of Israel. Now consider what I should take back to him who sent me. No, I've got a question for you. Would you rather? Because that's kind of what David has been presented here with. It's really just an extreme would you rather.
I would definitely do what David did.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think there's any, he gives the best reason for it. I would fall into the hand of the Lord.
Yeah. The Lord has, the Lord is merciful. But what does God presenting the choices to David tell us about how God viewed David?
Well, first off, what God wanted David to see, as he did with most things, because David was a man that if he did the wrong thing, he needed to see the consequences. David was fine with what he had done with Bathsheba until that prophet came and gave this story and made him see what he had really done. Then he was like, oh, I messed up. And he had to always see the consequences, which is kind of like me. But when I mess up and I don't see the consequences, I struggle with not doing that again. When I mess up and I see the consequences, I'm much more likely to. And I think that's most people.
Right.
And so what God wanted David to feel is the gravity of what you just did. You knew what you needed to do and you didn't listen. And so he said, and this is what I'm going to do. You pick.
Yeah.
Of these 3 options, it's one of these is going to happen. And you know what? I want you to pick it.
It's like when your mom makes you pick a punishment.
Yeah.
It's some of the worst experiences.
Would you rather get a spanking or not play video games for the day? I remember that one vividly.
Spanking. Go ahead.
I would say spanking.
Yeah.
Give me a spanking.
Give me 10 seconds
That one's
of pain.
over. I would say that one's over.
I
quick.
think that's kind of what David went for here. Because, there was 3, what was it?
3 years, 3 months,
3
or 3
years,
days.
3 months, or 3 days. Yeah. But is this a unique instance of choosing one's punishment? Has God, like, throughout the scriptures, has God given someone else an opportunity to choose how they've been punished?
No.
I'm going to be honest with you. At first, my response was just automatically, yes, this is unique, never happened before. And then I sat and I was like, is it though? Because like I genuinely had no clue.
I don't think
in my study of this, I tried so hard to find anywhere that it did, and I could find nothing.
I don't think so. God doesn't often present, and this is going to sound like God's being. This is going to sound like it makes God seem like he's trying to be better than us, and that's not what I'm trying to say. But God doesn't often present us with choices,
Right.
like that, because it's just not. It's probably not good for us.
Do you think he granted David the choice because David was a man after his own heart?
I think so. Yes, and again, I think this was also a test in a kind of way.
Yeah.
And this was basically one of those things where like you didn't trust me, and now I'm going to give you another chance through the punishment to see if you'll make the right choice.
Yeah.
Because what you're going to find in these three options is two of them you're going to be depending on men. If you think about it, because you're dealing with war, well, you're going to be in the hands of men because you'll be fighting.
Right.
And his problem was literally just about war. The second one is famine. And you're again going to be depending, because this wasn't like the famine in Egypt in Genesis, was that 45? And they had 7 years to prep for this. This was going to be a famine and they're going to lose everything. So what's going to happen is Israel's going to have to get food from somewhere else, which means they're going to have to rely on other people. Only one of these three options is David going to have to rely fully on God and what he does. But only one of these options is also, when I thought about it, only one of these options gets him involved. Because the famine, he's rich king. He still has food. His people might not. War, he can hide in the castle.
True, yeah.
Only one of them was he going to get punishment just like anyone else.
And that kind of shows the leader that David is willing to take, because he says, I have sinned, right? Because Joab told David, hey, if you do this, it's on you. Like, you are putting guilt on Israel. And David is willing to accept that responsibility. He's not willing to say, well, Joab should have warned me, should have warned me more. Or really, God, it's the people who counted the other people. Like, I just kind of made a suggestion, and David was willing to take responsibility, right, for his actions, which makes him a man after God's own heart, which is funny because God, never has to take responsibility for his actions because he is God and he always makes the perfect choice. Yeah. But just that idea of David wanting to be a leader who could take responsibility for his own mistakes and for the mistakes of his people, right? And that's kind of, because I'm sure the people were just as haughty as David was, right? It's like, the only thing I can think of, like a sports analogy, right? When your team has won, like, a ton of games in a row, you get pretty excited about it, right? You get pretty, you might get pretty arrogant about it. Being an Alabama fan, we've grown used to that, and so it's just that idea of
too soon.
I know. It's just that idea of it's easy to grow arrogant when your expectations are being met and exceeded, right? So I think this was a good humbling experience for not only David, but for all of the people of Israel, right? And so David was willing to take responsibility for not only himself and those people. You'll have any more to add about this particular part? It's just,
I think you're good.
It's so interesting that God, like the choices that David has here. Let me see. Let me pull up the next passage. Starting in verse, let's see. 13, right?
Yeah, 13.
13. And David said to Gad, I am in great distress. Please let me fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are very great, but do not let me fall into the hand of man. We probably should have read that before we talked about, because we just talked about the answer David gave and we never read the verse. But yeah, that is the answer David gave. So the Lord sent a plague upon Israel, and 70,000 men of Israel fell. And God sent an angel to Jerusalem to destroy it. As he was destroying, the Lord looked and relented of the disaster and said to the angel who was destroying, it is enough, now restrain your hand. And the angel of the Lord stood by the threshing floor of Ornan, the Jebusite. Question. Did God change his mind?
No, that's me. Okay.
I said me or you, Landon.
Well,
I'll add on.
Okay, so this is actually really interesting because you have God present the punishment. And we don't know if it's been the 3 days. One would assume it is because that's what he left. And then he stops. And so I would say in that instance, no, he didn't change his mind. What he saw was that this was done. What needed to be done was finished, because what actions have consequences, and the people now have seen the consequences. But what this shows about God is not only is he an all-powerful God that is able to do this, but he's also all-loving. He knows what you need, and he does it in the doses that you need it. And I think this shows the wisdom of David picking God, because in the war, the 3 years could have been longer. You don't know how long that is. The famine, the people that you're having to get this food from might have taxed you really hard. They might have ended up being able to take more stuff after the famine was over. We want your food now also. Both of the other two instances, you're having to rely on people, and people oftentimes do not do what they say they're going to do.
Yeah.
And this showed the wisdom of David knowing that I messed up, and at the end of the day, I deserve this. And God's going to do what he knows he needs to do. And I'm just going to have to deal with the consequences of that. And I think this showed the wisdom of David picking God's hand. God's going to be merciful. And he was. There came a point where God was like, and this is enough. You get the point, and I'm done.
Yeah. An all-powerful God does not change his mind, right? Because he knows what's going to happen. I think this goes back to kind of what we talked about earlier. It's more of an imagery type thing, God, this is simply to help us understand what kind of was going on at this point in time, right? It's like Landon said, everything was finished at this point. Yeah. So God didn't have to. So, and again, maybe a lot of that depended on David and what David was going to do, right? Maybe if David was still arrogant, or the people were still arrogant, then maybe Jerusalem would have been destroyed. But God saw that it was enough, and he relented from that, right? And it's, again, God didn't change his mind. It's just that imagery that helps us understand what's going on. It's like in Genesis 6, where God, it says, he was sorry that he made man. He regretted that he made man. Well, did God know that was going to happen when he created man? Of course it did. But the writer is trying to show that God is grieved right now because of what man is doing. And
he wished it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, and he wished it. But, and this analogy isn't original with me. Actually, one of my Bible class teachers used it. But it's like when you're watching a movie that you've already seen before, and there's a really sad part coming up, and it's coming, and you can't change it, and you see it, and it still makes you sad, even though you know it's coming.
Yeah.
Right? I'm sure that's how God must have felt, right? Because he knew it's coming, right? But it still made him sad when he saw it.
Right. Yeah, that is interesting. That idea of, I guess I like what Landon said. Just God knowing that God knew when it was going to be finished, right? When he would have done enough. And so once he reached that point, then he relented, right? Just that idea of understanding again, like Landon said, I feel like I'm just probably repeating, but that idea of understanding, God knows when we've had enough, and God knows what, the only word that comes to mind is dosage we need of punishment and of blessings, so that we can live, a good spiritual life in his sight. And that's what he was trying to show David. Moving on, looking at the next, let's see, we left off in verse 15. So picking up in verse 16. Then David lifted his eyes and saw the angel of the Lord standing between earth and heaven, having in his hand a drawn sword stretched out over Jerusalem. So David and the elders, clothed in sackcloth, fell on their faces. And David said to God, "Was it not I who commanded the people to be numbered? I am the one, who has sinned and done evil indeed. But these sheep, what have they done? Let your hand, I pray, O Lord, my God, be against me and my father's house, but not against your people, that they should be plagued." That is a scary image of the angel of the Lord holding his sword out over Jerusalem. And it's one that David clearly understood, because now he begins to beg God for mercy, not for himself, but for his people. It's very Christ-like in the way he was, willing to take responsibility for, again, and I said this before, not only his own actions, but for the actions of his people, right? He says, these sheep have not done anything, right? And we go back to Psalm 23, right? And David talking about how God was a good shepherd and a leader. And David's trying to be like God in that idea of leading these sheep, these people who simply don't understand what's going on, right? They don't understand why they're being plagued. I would assume they don't understand why they're being plagued. They don't understand why all this is happening, but David does, right? David knows why they're in the valley, because David says, "I have put my people here," right? And he's willing to take responsibility. So for those who seek to lead, right? And if you're a Christian, you're probably going to find yourself in some kind of leadership role, whether you're placed there, whether you simply just by acting according to God's standards, you find yourself there. What do we learn from David's apology here?
I think you learn a lesson about true leadership and what that looks like, right? Again, if you go back to the very beginning of this of this passage, especially in 2 Samuel, it says God is looking for an opportunity to punish Israel, right? And obviously David was probably included in that. But the point of this was to humble Israel, all of them, not just David. And maybe David could have said, Lord, it was the people who were prideful, right? It was them who said, it was them who convinced me to be so proud or anything like that, right? He could have given excuses. Leaders don't give excuses. Leaders always, if whoever you're responsible for, if those people mess up, even if it wasn't your fault, you take responsibility for that, right? Because that's what true Christian leaders do, right? Ultimate example, Jesus, right? He paid the price for us messing up. He could have said, no, you're on your own. Fix it on your own. Fix those mistakes on your own. This isn't my fault. I tried to show you how to live and you couldn't do it, right? But he didn't. He died for us. Now, you don't have to, and again, it depends, it very heavily depends on the circumstance. You don't have to claim always that it's your fault because it won't always be your fault. But you better be there when the people you're leading are getting punished. You better be there too, right? Mm-hmm. It isn't just, hey, I'm the leader, I'm gonna punish you. No, we're all gonna fix this. We're all gonna be better, right? Because I don't want a leader who looks down on me and says, you're being punished, right?
Yeah.
Even if it is our fault, we still want someone who's there to bear the load with us, right? And David was willing to do that. That's why the people of Israel loved David so much, because he was always willing to be right there next to him. He was always willing to bear that punishment, right? People could see that, hey, we have it rough, but David's going through just as much right now. He didn't wall himself away. He could have, but he didn't. Right? He could, again, Landon, it goes back to, he could have picked the punishments where famine, well, David probably wouldn't have been affected by a famine that much.
Yeah.
Or the wars of the army, well, David's fighting days were behind him at this point. So he probably wouldn't have gone out to battle. So, he picked the punishment where everyone was affected, including him. And he begged God right here, punish me.
Yeah.
Let me take it because it was his fault. And leaders, when it is your fault, you take all the punishment.
I'm about to say, yeah.
Leading is it's not something where you get rewarded in the way you want, right? When some of your people mess up, you're taking the punishment right along with them. When you mess up, you take all the punishment, right? And hopefully you have people who help you with that. The people you lead help you with that, but it's not always easy.
I think a leader taking punishment when you're in that position and you're taking responsibility for your actions. How the people you have led respond to you doing that will show you the type of leader that you have been. Right? If they're like, wow, man, he's getting what he deserves, like, thank goodness, then obviously you haven't led as well as you need to. But if they're willing, hey, he is taking responsibility for his own actions, and we know that he's willing to take responsibility for my actions. So let us help him. Landon, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think this ultimately comes down to taking responsibility. I mean, that's what a leader is. You're responsible not only for what you have done, but what your people that you're leading have done. I think this shows a big difference between Saul and David, because you have Saul after he had just literally done what he was not supposed to do, and they had not killed everyone. He saved the king, and they saved the best of the livestock, and he gets back, and God's like, what are you doing? Like, why? You're not listening to me. And his response is, I didn't do anything. Look, the people, they're the ones with the animals. I didn't do that. And instead you see David, he gets done with this, and God's like, what are you doing? Yeah, I just told you to not do this. And David's like, you're right. I messed up. This is my fault. Mm-hmm. And then we see him play this out as, you just punish me. This isn't the people's fault. This is mine. But ultimately, actions have consequences. And as a leader, when you make mistakes, a lot of the times it affects the people you're leading as well. And David needed to see that.
Yeah, one of the other examples too is Aaron when he made the golden calf. Moses is up on the mountain.
This was the people's fault. This is what they wanted.
And Aaron, the people come to Aaron and they ask, and Aaron's like, okay, give me all your gold. I'll make you this calf. And Aaron, molds the gold, makes it into a shape. And then, they're worshiping it. And Moses comes down the mountain and he asks Aaron, he's like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, well, the people wanted me to do something, make a god. So I just threw the gold in the fire and poof, out came a golden calf.
I don't know how this happened. I really don't know.
I got no clue. It's just, it
Crazy.
went in, it just came out. Like,
So it's obviously the people's fault, right? And Aaron was obviously trying to protect himself.
Yeah.
But yeah, so again, true leadership, you see people take responsibility for the people's actions.
Moses took responsibility for the children of Israel's actions after that had happened.
Yeah.
He was like, God, do not punish them, but or if you punish them, punish me as well.
Yeah, let me be blotted out of your book. Right? Because God told Moses, I will make you a great nation out of you.
Yeah.
Right? And these people will be destroyed in the wilderness. But Moses said, Lord, let it not be so. Let me be blotted out of your book.
Looking back, I just realized God knew what Moses was going to say. God knew Moses was going to say no, yet God still presented him with a choice. I guess just probably reaffirming Moses' own mind. No, my fate is with these people.
Yeah.
Right. My fate is with the Israelites. But yeah, taking responsibility is what leaders do, and that's what David did. Looking at picking up in verse 20, 18. I'm sorry. Therefore, the angel of the Lord commanded Gad to say to David that David should go and erect an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. So David went up at the word of Gad, which he had spoken in the name of the Lord. Now Ornan turned and saw the angel, and his 4 sons who were with him hid themselves. But Ornan continued threshing wheat. Okay, this is kind of a side note, but when I preached on this lesson, it kind of confused me. Is Ornan just like not afraid? Is he like being like almost disrespectful in the fact that he's not showing, like hiding from the angel of the Lord? Like imagine seeing the angel of the Lord and just going back to whatever you're doing. Like,
is it one of those situations where like someone's watching you and you're trying to like act natural?
Maybe.
Because you just read, right, his sons bolted.
His sons hid themselves.
They were out.
I don't blame him, dude. I would have been gone.
I mean, everyone had just died because
yeah.
And when my mind always goes to the Assyrians, right, where the angel of the Lord comes out and kills 185 of the Assyrians in one night.
185,000.
185,000. Yeah, big difference. Sorry, 185,000 of the Assyrians in one night. Right. And he just stretched his sword out. And the Assyrians were the best.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, and obviously the sons of Ornan didn't know that at this point. But I mean, like, you have no chance. I don't think running would do you any good. But I mean, it's a natural human response.
I kind of threw it at Ornan, like, saying like, well, he didn't obviously understand. I don't mean that, but like, do you think it could have been something along the lines of Ornan knew that he wasn't going to be taken? Like Ornan knew that the angel of the Lord isn't here for me.
Or he knew that there's no point in running.
I mean, there's so many possibilities of what went through his mind. I mean, it could have been that he knew that there was nothing that he could do. It could have been that he has a job to do and I'm going to do that until I die. Because, the captain goes down with the ship. There are some people, I have a job to do and I'm going to keep doing it until I die. Or it could have been that he was just like, like for me, when we have tornado warnings, my immediate response is, I'm going back to bed. Like
wow, I remember that.
If it's time to go, then it's time to go. That's probably not how I should think. That's not how my mom wants me to think.
Landon was at our house and the tornado alarm went off and he just goes, I'm going back to bed. I was like, okay, buddy.
I think when you have a family, you'll probably think about it a little differently.
Definitely, a little bit different.
But when it's just you,
it's already changed a little bit. But, and that could be possibly Ornan was like, man, look, if it's time to go, I'm ready. I mean, or he could just be crazy and he just doesn't care. I mean, we're never going to know. I mean, one can speculate. We're seeing the character that he has as we go through here of trying to give David the property. I don't find this man crazy or stupid.
Yeah.
If maybe ignorant or maybe he was just, this is what I'm going to do and I'm going to do this until it's time for me to go.
I like what you said. I like to think that Ornan was just like, he can kill me if he kills me and he'll let me live if he lets me live.
I'm going to die doing what I love.
I'm just going to keep doing what I'm here to do, and I like that. I like that image, but
wheat's got to be threshed.
I'm about to say, I don't know. So, picking up in verse 21. So David came to Ornan and Ornan looked and saw David and he went out from his threshing floor and bowed down before David with his face to the ground. So he bowed down to David, but he didn't bow down to the angel of the Lord.
Well, yeah, I don't know.
I'm about to say that just makes it even more confusing, but
yeah, we'll never know.
I mean, it was the king.
That's true, but the angel was the angel of the Lord.
We don't exactly like understand where the angel of the Lord is at this point. Like we know he's there, but like,
yeah, that's true.
Where?
Yeah. Then David said to Ornan, grant me this place, the place of this threshing floor, that I may build an altar on it to the Lord. You shall grant it to me at full price, that the plague may be withdrawn from the people. But Ornan said to David, take it yourself, and let my lord the king do what is good in his eyes. Look, I also give you the oxen for the burnt offering, the threshing implements for the wood, and the wheat for the grain offering. I give it all. Then David said to Ornan, no, but I will surely buy it for full price, for I will not take what is yours for the Lord, nor burnt offerings that with that which costs me nothing. So David gave Ornan 600 shekels of gold by the weight for the place, and David built there an offering to the Lord, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, and called on the Lord. And he answered him from heaven by fire on the altar of the burnt offering. So the Lord commanded the angel, and he returned his sword to his sheath. At this time, when David saw that the Lord had answered him on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, he sacrificed there. For the tabernacle of the Lord and the altar of the burnt offering, which Moses made in the wilderness, were at the time at the high place of Gibeon. But David could not go before it to inquire of the Lord, to inquire of God, for he was afraid of the sword of the angel of the Lord. That is, so David offers a sacrifice, right? God accepts his sacrifice. And I guess as we begin to close, why was David still afraid of the sword of the angel of the Lord? The sword of the angel of the Lord.
I feel like if you saw something or someone kill 70,000 people,
that's true.
I feel like you'd be pretty
It's
scared
like
too.
kind of like a post-traumatic stress type thing.
I mean, yeah. I mean, he just, he was afraid.
Yeah.
It's a natural response. And we've seen this a few times where, like, remember David and Uzzah were transporting the ark, and Uzzah touched the ark because they weren't transporting it the way they were supposed to, and Uzzah died, and David
left it there.
He just leaves it.
Yeah.
Yeah. He puts it in a house that's next to where it fell, and he just leaves it there.
I was picturing they just left it like
No, it was
right
in a
by
house
the road
because David knew it was time to bring it back because God started blessing that house. Right. But David just leaves it because, and again, that's understandable because, and David didn't handle it in the right way. David didn't want to mess anything up, I'm sure. Right. And he didn't want to bring any more wrath upon himself or upon the people. Right. So I think he's trying to do the right thing by just simply waiting on God.
Right.
He talks about it a lot in the Psalms. Wait on the Lord. He's literally waiting right now for the angel of the Lord to go away. But yeah, so I think he's just making sure he doesn't mess anything up.
Right. Landon, what strikes you as the theme that we need to take away from this story?
I mean, there's a lot of things. I'm gonna first answer the last question.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to add on. I think it's interesting. I mean, when we find the sacrifice, I really love the fact that David didn't find the cheapest way to worship God. He was going to make sure he sacrificed in this.
Really interestingly, Solomon got 666 shekels of gold a year. David paid 600 shekels of gold for this.
Wow.
So he paid like what Solomon got in gold in a year.
I thought it was talents of gold.
Oh, it might have been. You're right.
I was going to say, because like, that is a lot.
It was a lot of gold.
It was a lot of gold with David's family, but I was like, there's no way Solomon.
But I mean, as you sit there and you think about why would David have been afraid to worship? If I had just messed up the way I did and that many people lost their lives and I had repented, I had offered sacrifice, I'm still going to have guilt.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be afraid to come before that angel. I'm going to feel in a way that I don't feel worthy to walk in front of that angel. But anyway, going to the theme of what this really was teaching is an overall theme, as is with David's stories in his life. There's a lot of lessons you learn from very short parts of his life. I mean, we see parts about like, you have to trust God. And that's ultimately what this is about. God is trying to show that, there's a lot of times in the Bible where hard times come and God shows us, trust me, I've got you. I'm going to take care of this. But God was showing us through the life of David that equally important, not only when there's hard times and struggles, but equally important when everything seems right, you've got to trust me then too. Okay? Because when everything seems right, it's just as equally likely that Satan's going to tempt you. And in both instances, trust me. But when you mess up, come back to me. There's actions have consequences, but come back to me with sacrifice. And we will make things right.
It's very interesting because we don't see it this way, and we probably should. It's almost like what we see is we come out of a hard time where we relied on God, and we're like, man, glad to be out of the valley. We're on the mountain now. And we feel like we're going to be so much more spiritual. We're going to be so much happier now that we're on the mountain. From a spiritual aspect, if you look at it through your biblical worldview or your spiritual, lenses, whatever you want to call it, it's almost like when you go out of the hard times where you are relying on God, God sees you getting closer to the danger, not farther away from it, right? And we have to remember this world isn't forever.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's good to go through hard times for a moment because it helps you rely on God, right? God gives that to you so that you can rely on him more, right? I would rather have hard times on this earth my whole life than be separated from God for eternity.
Yeah.
Right. And that's ultimately the reality we have to think of. That's what he tries to teach David over and over and over again. And I think in the end, David did learn that lesson. Right. But I mean, we don't want that. No one wants that. I don't want hard times for the rest of my life. But if it gets me closer to God, then it gets me closer to God. Bottom of the line.
I've walked through some valleys in my own life, and y'all have as well. And the people listening probably have walked in valleys far deeper than my own. But I remember thinking exactly that. If I can just get out, and I always like picturing, my Christian walk is, me like walking in the armor of God through the woods, right? And, in the valleys and in the mountains. And it's just like, if I can get out of here and I can get back to the high places, right? The mountains that David talks about, and then I'll be okay. Right. And I don't want to present this idea of that every day in the Christian walk, it is this day of danger and like you're always on the run from Satan, right? And temptation is knocking at every door, no matter where you are and how spiritually mature you are. Because I don't believe, in the end, you can only take so much temptation, and God will not allow you to be tempted more than you are able, right? So it's that idea of finding the balance between walking in the good places, walking in on the high places, but also understanding that you're still able to fall. Right? The ground you're walking on is secure, but you're still, if you get distracted, you can fall off, right?
Yeah.
That idea of trusting in God no matter where you are, because no matter where you are, you can still fall. Rejoice in the times that you are in the high places, but also be wary. It's that kind of combination, if you will.
And just remember, we talk about valleys and mountains. That's a physical way to view things because physically I'm in distress, or physically I've got everything I need. Spiritually, that's not how we view it, right? You can be spiritually in a bad place, spiritually in a good place. But a lot of the times when I'm physically in a bad place, spiritually I'm in a good place, right? So it's often when our physical mountains are high, our spiritual valleys are low, right? And vice versa. So we have to be much more aware of your spiritual, right? Of where you are spiritually than where you are physically. Because really, that doesn't matter.
Ultimately, I think as we close, David was willing to trust in man and man's power before he was willing to trust in God's. He was willing to say that man has brought me up on this mountain and man has taken me out of the valleys, and he forgot that it was God who placed him on the high places. He forgot that it was God who was his shepherd, and I think that was the struggle that he had. So any closing thoughts before we end?
I don't think I have anything.
Wow.
I know.
Impressive. I can't believe I'm going to be the one who gives the outro and signs it off. But again, we want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Straight Fire Podcast. It was a joy to have all of you. If you haven't already, go ahead and support the podcast in any way you can. If you had any questions about this episode or any episode that we did previously, or just questions or topics that you want to bring to the podcast, you can comment them on Spotify. You can comment on YouTube. You can email us. Whatever way you can get in contact with us, I promise you we will do our best to see it and give a response. Once again, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.